The officer stood on a landmine and suddenly lifted his foot, which startled the new recruits. It turned out that the officer had known all along that it was an anti-tank mine and a person's weight was not enough to detonate it. Then, the officer had the new recruits dig out the mine as he planned to use it against. They brought the mine to the end of the tunnel and the new recruits placed it in a designated spot according to the officer's instructions. Just as they were connecting the fuse at the entrance, the scout suddenly noticed that the enemy's tanks had arrived half an hour earlier than expected. The scout hurried back to the position to pass on the information, but the officer was still inside the tunnel setting up the bomb. The officer quickly ordered the soldiers to leave the tunnel first while he continued to place the explosives. The soldiers, reluctant to leave, urged the officer to withdraw, and soon the officer finally completed the task. But at that moment, the soldiers who were withdrawing suddenly discovered that one of the fuses on the bomb had come loose. The officer rushed over to fix it and ordered the soldiers to leave the tunnel immediately. Soon, the enemy's tank column had already entered the tunnel. The officer calmly walked forward and then lied, claiming to be their commanding officer. Because the officer was wearing the enemy's uniform, the enemy gradually let their guard. The officer continued to deceive them, trying to lure them into the trap he had set. Soon, the enemy followed the officer out of the tunnel. The officer signaled to the soldiers with his eyes to detonate the bomb, but the soldiers didn't want to harm the officer. As the soldiers were still hesitating, the officer deliberately exposed his identity and was shot by the enemy. Next, the soldiers detonated the bomb. With a violent explosion, the enemy was instantly buried by the tunnel. Those who survived by chance and tried to escape were shot by the soldiers outside. Soon, the enemy had suffered heavy casualties and the remaining forces had to quickly take cover in their tanks. The tanks drove over the anti-tank mine at the end of the tunnel, but this did not stop them. The tanks that burst out of the tunnel turned their guns and prepared to attack the soldiers on the hillside. The soldiers were heavily damaged by the shells, and the adjutant rushed down the hillside to block the tank's advance. He stuffed a grenade into the barrel and, taking advantage of the enemy's inattention, opened the hatch and began to fire at the enemies inside. After destroying the tank, the adjutant ordered the soldiers defending the hillside to launch. Soon, a large number of soldiers poured into the tunnel, and the remaining enemy forces could no longer resist. Faced with a barrage of bullets, the enemies were quickly driven into a panic and fled. In the end, the officer completed the mission. The tank was destroyed. He completed the mission at the cost of his own life.